Every night for 3 decades, Johnny Carson sat beneath the bright lights of the Tonight Show desk and made America laugh. His timing was perfect, his charm effortless, and his smile seemed as real as the laughter it inspired. But what the audience didn't see, what the cameras never showed, was the other side of that smile. The one that disappeared the second the applause stopped. Behind the curtain, the Tonight Show wasn't just television, it was a kingdom. And Carson wasn't just the host, he was the king. The rules were his, the silence was his weapon, and the network made sure nobody ever questioned him. What the public saw was comedy. What the crew saw was control. A man who demanded perfection, who ruled by quiet fear, and who could end a career with nothing more than a look. For years, NBC protected him, burying footage, silencing stories, and turning the other way whenever his temper or vices threatened to spill onto the screen. It was an open secret in the halls of Burbank. The cameras might have stopped rolling, but the real show never ended. Tonight, we're uncovering the truth the network never aired, the hidden stories, the banned guests, the broken friendships, and the power plays that kept The Tonight Show untouchable. Because while Johnny Carson made America laugh, nobody dared to laugh when the cameras turned off. How NBC protected its golden boy. Johnny Carson wasn't just a talk show host, he was NBC. At his peak, The Tonight Show brought in tens of millions of viewers and hundreds of millions in advertising. The network built entire schedules around his airtime, and executives treated him like a national asset, which meant one thing: no matter what went wrong behind the scenes, the story would never leave the building. Producers, PR teams, and even legal staff were part of the protection system. If Johnny lost his temper, if a guest complained, or if something questionable happened off camera, NBC handled it quietly, not out of loyalty, but out of fear of losing the brand. "You didn't cross Johnny," one former employee said. "You didn't even talk about him unless you knew who was listening." The network's silence wasn't just policy, it was survival. There were nights when segments were cut before they ever aired. Guests who pushed boundaries found their appearances mysteriously lost in post-production. When Johnny's drinking became a problem, nobody wrote about it. When rumors of affairs or late-night outbursts surfaced, they disappeared faster than the morning ratings memo. Reporters who tried to dig too deep found themselves suddenly disinvited from NBC events. Carson wasn't just protected, he was insulated by a wall of power. Executives justified it as good business. "If Johnny sinks, we all sink," one NBC insider famously said. That mindset turned into a culture of denial. The studio became a place where uncomfortable truths were buried and rewritten as anecdotes. When a guest stormed off, it was creative tension. When Carson's mood turned icy, it was method. Even his darkest moments were reframed as part of the legend. Behind closed doors, producers referred to it as Carson Damage Control. It was an unspoken department that didn't officially exist, but everyone knew about it. The goal was simple: protect the image, protect the money, protect the myth. Every potential scandal was smoothed over before it could reach the tabloids. In exchange, Carson gave NBC what it wanted: ratings dominance and cultural immortality. For 30 years, the system worked. NBC looked spotless, and Johnny's reputation remained untouchable. But that silence came with a cost. Every cover-up, every erased tape, every whispered threat to keep quiet chipped away at the truth, until the line between show business and secrecy was gone. The network didn't just protect Johnny Carson, it protected the illusion of who people thought he was. The culture of silence that ruled The Tonight Show. To the outside world, The Tonight Show was pure joy, laughter, music, and effortless conversation. But inside NBC Studio One, it was something else entirely. Behind the cameras, a quiet fear ran through the halls. Every person on set, from writers to cameramen, knew that one wrong move could cost them everything. Because in Johnny Carson's world, mistakes weren't forgotten. They were erased. Writers learned early how to read the room, or rather, read Johnny. His moods dictated the tone of the entire day. If he came in whistling, everyone breathed easier. If he came in silent, the air turned heavy. A single sigh, a frown, or a cold glance from Johnny was enough to send people rewriting entire scripts before the next commercial break. There were no meetings, no reprimands, just that look. The one that said, "You won't get another chance." Crew members used to joke that they didn't need a schedule, they just needed to watch Johnny's face. If he didn't laugh during rehearsal, everyone knew to stay late. If he walked off stage too quickly, someone was about to be fired. It wasn't that Carson yelled or threw tantrums. He didn't have to. His silence was punishment enough. The people around him learned to fill the space before he could. That tension created a strange kind of loyalty. People didn't just fear Johnny, they admired him. They saw his precision, his work ethic, his ability to turn pressure into perfection. He was a master, and they wanted to keep up. The laughter America heard every night came from a crew working like surgeons, terrified of making a single wrong cut. For Johnny, that fear wasn't cruelty, it was quality control. But for those living inside it, the line between respect and fear blurred long ago. Every once in a while, a new writer or intern would arrive, bright-eyed and eager to impress. They'd speak too casually, tell a joke at the wrong time, or try to bond with Johnny off camera. Within days, they'd be gone. No explanation, no goodbye, just gone. The veterans would shrug and whisper, "He wasn't ready for this place. It wasn't personal. It was the Tonight Show way." Over time, that culture became the show's invisible backbone. People learned to keep quiet, to smile on command, and to never ever contradict the man behind the desk. To survive on the Tonight Show meant understanding one unspoken rule. The laughter stops when Johnny does, and when it stopped, the silence could last for days. The off-air Johnny nobody dared film. The second the cameras cut, Johnny Carson changed. The grin faded, the shoulders dropped, and the man who'd just made 10 million people laugh became someone else entirely. Staffers said it was like watching a mask fall off. One moment, pure charm, the next, quiet detachment. Between takes, he rarely spoke. Sometimes he'd stare at the floor, lost in thought. Other times, he'd vanish into his dressing room without a word. His quietness wasn't peaceful, it was sharp. If a joke bombed or a guest made him uncomfortable, everyone could feel the temperature drop. He'd finish the segment, keep smiling, then disappear the moment the applause ended. Once the doors closed, nobody knew which Johnny they were about to get. The professional, the perfectionist, or the man who'd had one drink too many. Carson's relationship with alcohol was no secret to those inside the studio. He drank quietly but consistently, bourbon before taping, cocktails after. Some nights, the charm deepened with the buzz. Other nights, it fueled a simmering edge that left the crew walking on eggshells. A few unlucky guests caught glimpses of that version. The Johnny who didn't hold back, whose wit cut a little too deep. It never made it to air, but people remembered. Those off-camera moments were sacred to the staff, not because they admired them, but because they feared what would happen if they ever leaked. NBC's unspoken rule was simple. What happened after the lights went down stayed buried. One wrong word to the press and your career in television was over. So they kept the secrets, the long nights, the slurred rehearsals, the occasional shouting through closed doors, all hidden behind the image of late-night perfection. Still, some couldn't help but talk in whispers. They said Johnny's temper wasn't loud, it was cold. The kind that didn't explode, just froze everything around it. He'd never yell, one former assistant said. He'd just stop talking to you, and that was worse. To lose his favor meant to vanish from his world entirely, sometimes overnight. By the late 1970s, Carson's dual identity had become an open secret, the charming entertainer who could turn ice cold once the camera stopped rolling. Yet no matter how unpredictable he became, the machine kept turning. The laughter, the applause, the ratings, they covered everything. Because when you're America's favorite face at midnight, the world only sees the light. The darkness stays between takes. Segments NBC buried forever. For every moment that aired on The Tonight Show, there were dozens that didn't. Moments the public never saw, and NBC made sure they never would. Some were cut for time, others vanished without a trace. And then there were the segments that were deliberately erased, the ones that didn't fit the image of America's late-night gentleman. The so-called lost tapes weren't just accidents of history, they were casualties of control. In the 1960s and 70s, NBC routinely reused videotapes to save money, erasing older episodes to record new ones. That's the official story. But insiders claimed some of those reels weren't reused by coincidence. They were destroyed on purpose. Segments that made Carson look bad, guests who clashed with him, jokes that crossed the line, gone forever. The early archive of The Tonight Show is full of holes, and not all of them were financial. There were rumors of explosive interviews that disappeared before they could air. One guest reportedly drunk insulted Carson during a taping. The next day, the footage was gone, replaced with a clean retake and a polished smile. Another segment involved a political joke that NBC deemed too dangerous for its sponsors. It never left the editing room. Even the crew wasn't allowed to keep copies. Everything was tightly monitored. Once something went missing, one editor said, "You never asked where it went. You just pretended it never existed." Some of the missing material became legend among the staff. The night a major celebrity stormed off mid-interview, the unaired exchange that turned a friendly chat into an argument. Even the famous Don Rickles cigarette box incident, which audiences thought was spontaneous, had parts that were edited down to soften Johnny's visible anger. The Carson everyone saw on TV wasn't the man who walked off stage that night. The difference was measured in milliseconds, just enough to preserve his charm. By the 1980s, NBC's damage control strategy had become an art form. If a show went wrong, editors worked through the night to clean it up before broadcast. If Carson stumbled, it was smoothed over. If a guest looked humiliated, the cut was softened. The goal was simple: keep The Tonight Show flawless. Viewers were never supposed to see imperfection. Not in Johnny, not in the guests, not in the laughter. Everything was edited until it looked like magic. Today, television historians call those missing episodes a tragedy. But to those who worked there, they were a shield, proof that even perfection needed a little rewriting. The lost tapes weren't just erased moments. They were reminders that The Tonight Show wasn't live spontaneity. It was carefully engineered history, crafted to look effortless, and sanitized to stay untouchable. The one rule you never break. Joan Rivers wasn't just another guest on The Tonight Show. She was family. For years, Johnny Carson treated her like a protege, the rare comedian who could match his wit punch for punch. He gave her one of her first big breaks, made her a regular guest host, and called her the best substitute I've ever had. When Joan was on the desk, ratings stayed strong. Viewers loved her, and Johnny seemed proud, or at least he used to be. Then in 1986, everything changed. Rivers got an offer from Fox to host her own late-night show, a direct competitor to Carson's Tonight Show. The problem wasn't the job, it was how Johnny found out. He didn't hear it from her. He heard it from the press. To Carson, that wasn't business, it was betrayal. The man who ruled his studio by silence now used that same weapon on the woman he once called his friend. The phone call was short, cold, and final. When Joan tried to explain, Johnny hung up. She never heard from him again. From that day forward, she was blacklisted from The Tonight Show, banned from appearing even decades after Carson's retirement. It wasn't just professional exile, it was personal erasure. For Johnny, loyalty wasn't negotiable. It was absolute. Break it once, and you were gone forever. Joan later said the silence nearly destroyed her. She'd lost her mentor, her friend, and the man who had helped build her career. In interviews, she often defended him, saying, "He was hurt, I understand." But underneath the grace, you could feel the heartbreak. When she returned to NBC almost 30 years later, long after Johnny's death, she said the studio felt haunted. It was like walking into a ghost story, she admitted. Those who worked at NBC said the fallout was a message. Carson didn't yell or threaten. He didn't have to. His silence was enough to rewrite history. It reminded everyone what kind of power he really had. The ability to make someone vanish, not just from his life, but from television itself. Joan's name was never mentioned again on the show. The laughter moved on, but something in The Tonight Show changed that night. For decades, the story was whispered around Hollywood as a cautionary tale. No one was untouchable, not even the people closest to Johnny. If The Tonight Show had an unspoken rulebook, this was written in bold on the first page. You can laugh with the king, but you never compete with him. How he controlled everyone around him. Johnny Carson didn't need to fight for power, he engineered it. In an industry built on chaos, he created order on his own terms, setting rules that everyone around him followed whether they wanted to or not. Other hosts came and went, but Johnny's throne stayed untouched for 30 years. He was the face of late night, the voice America trusted after dark, and the man whose approval could make or break a career. He had rivals, of course, and he played them like chess pieces. When David Letterman started gaining popularity as a guest host, Carson seemed supportive. But insiders knew better. He quietly reminded NBC who had the real leverage. Letterman was never offered Carson's seat when he retired, despite years of loyalty. It wasn't an accident, it was a power move. Carson made sure that whoever succeeded him would never do so on his terms. Even Wayne Newton learned that lesson the hard way. After Newton publicly accused Carson of mocking him behind his back, the feud turned ugly. Newton confronted him in person, rumors say in Carson's office, and it nearly came to blows. The story was quickly buried, but insiders say Carson was shaken. Still, he never apologized, never backed down. He didn't need to. He knew Newton would lose more by fighting him than he ever would by staying silent. Carson's control wasn't loud, it was psychological. If you earned his trust, you were untouchable. But if you crossed him, even unintentionally, your name could quietly disappear from the booking list. Agents learned to play by his rules. Guests learned to tread lightly. Even other comedians, from Leno to Rickles, knew when to pull back a punchline if it came too close to Johnny's pride. He didn't demand respect. He created an environment where it was the only option. Some people called him paranoid. Others called him a genius. Maybe he was both. Carson understood the power of perception, that appearing calm, detached, and in control was its own form of intimidation. He didn't just host The Tonight Show, he orchestrated it, from the lighting to the laughter. His world ran on rhythm, and anyone who broke that rhythm became an outsider. By the time he retired, his influence stretched far beyond the desk. The entire culture of late-night television still followed his playbook. Charm on the surface, control underneath. Johnny didn't just dominate the screen. He reshaped the power dynamic of entertainment itself. He proved that sometimes, the strongest grip isn't the one that squeezes, it's the one that never lets go. People who crossed him never came back. In Johnny Carson's world, forgiveness wasn't part of the script. If you crossed him once, that was enough. The public never saw it happen. There were no dramatic confrontations, no official announcements, but behind the scenes, people knew exactly what it meant to be off the list. The Tonight Show's booking team never said the word banned. They didn't need to. The silence said it all. The most infamous name on that list was, of course, Joan Rivers. But she wasn't alone. Wayne Newton never returned after their confrontation. His feud with Johnny became so personal that both men refused to speak of it again. Chevy Chase appeared only once before being quietly blacklisted. Carson found him arrogant and unprepared, and that was enough. Charles Grodin, whose mock-hostile banter made Johnny uncomfortable, found himself frozen out for years. These weren't professional decisions. They were personal ones, disguised as programming choices. Even Bobcat Goldthwait learned how unforgiving the system was when he set fire to the guest chair during Jay Leno's era. Carson made it clear that under his watch, That kind of chaos would have ended a career instantly. Guests who disrespected the format, the stage, or Johnny himself were treated as if they'd broken an ancient law. The Tonight Show wasn't just entertainment, it was sacred ground, and Johnny was its high priest. But it wasn't just celebrities. Writers, producers, and even longtime staff could find themselves quietly erased. A wrong comment, a leaked story, a disloyal joke, and suddenly your name was gone from the credits. You didn't get fired, one former writer said, you just stopped existing. NBC never issued memos, never admitted it happened, but everyone in the business understood the message. You don't talk about Johnny Carson unless you want to disappear too. The banned list became part of the show's mythology. People whispered about who might be on it, who might have been forgiven, and who was doomed to stay off the stage forever. It wasn't written down anywhere, but the power it held was real. Just the fear of ending up on it kept people in line. Agents would warn clients before every appearance, don't tease him, don't interrupt him, don't make him look bad. Because one mistake on that stage could cost you more than your dignity. It could cost you your future. That invisible blacklist outlasted the man himself. For decades after Carson's retirement, The Tonight Show quietly honored it. Joan Rivers didn't appear again until after Johnny's death, nearly 30 years later. It was as if his shadow still sat behind that desk, deciding who was welcome and who wasn't. And maybe that's the real mark of his power. He didn't just dominate the airwaves while he was alive. He controlled them long after he was gone. What the cameras never showed. In front of the camera, Johnny Carson was the man who made America laugh. Behind it, he was the man who made everyone around him stay quiet. For 30 years, The Tonight Show looked effortless, but it was built on fear, loyalty, and control. NBC protected him, the crew obeyed him, and those who didn't, they vanished. The cameras showed the laughter, the timing, the charm. What they never showed was the cost. Because Johnny Carson didn't just host a show, he ruled an empire. And when the lights went out, the king of late night sat alone on his throne, smiling at a world that never really knew him.